Oh, okay, great. And our speaker, David Rehkopf, who was a Robert Wood Johnson Fellow here for probably 2 years, and was at UCSF for a couple of years before that, and now is at Stanford Medical School. And he's going to be talking about work on sort of projecting the U.S. Potential labor force by disability status and race ethnicity. And this is work he's doing for a panel, National Academy of Sciences panel, that's looking at the long-run macroeconomic effects of population aging. And so an important part of that is what shape the future labor force is going to be. How realistic is it to think about having the retirement age rise and so on. So, David.
Okay, thank you. Jack Rowe contacted Nancy Adler and I about doing this paper, I guess, back in March and April. And so we've been working on it together since then. So it's a simple overall research question that we have. What will the population ability to work be in the U.S. for individuals aged 55 to 74 in 2050? And I'm going to talk more about what we mean by ability to work and talking about the background in a minute. But just to say briefly up front, what we're talking about is if someone is healthy enough, both physically and mentally, to work. And so we're trying to get at something outside of a choice to retire early, outside of some of those individual decisions that happen as people get a little older. But really, are they physically, in both the mental and physical sense, able to work? So why is the answer to this question unclear? By 2050, we obviously know there's a lot of different things that are going to be happening. We clearly know changes in the population distribution by age, changes in the racial ethnic composition of our country, potential changes, and then there's also a number of potential changes in disability that impact ability to work, potential changes in occupational types looking out to 2050, and then also potentially changes in socioeconomic characteristics, which are also associated, as I'll show, with ability to work. So I'm going to give an overview first of the approach to answering this question, which is 4 steps. First, to build multivariate models based on current predictors of work using HRS data in this population aged 55 to 59. And building on Cutler's prior work, which I'll talk about on the next slide, we're going to make an assumption that in this period of ages 55 to 59, people are primarily not working because they can't. And so there's going to be exceptions to that, but as a general rule, if you're physically able and mentally able, we're going to say in that age category, people will be working. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to estimate, that's a big assumption of what we're doing now. The second step is we're going to estimate the prevalence of all these predictors in this model that I'll talk about out to 2050. And a lot of that's based on census data, the Social Security Technical Panel data, and so for some things it's a little more certain than others. And so I'll talk about how we approach that with things like disability and functional limitations that could be going in multiple directions based on past trends. Then step 3 is based on the multivariate models and the estimation of prevalence. We're going to actually based on just step 2, we're going to simulate the future population based on these predictor prevalences over time. In some cases, stratifying by race, ethnicity, and usually stratifying by age, but depending on the factor. Then the final step 4 is we're going to apply this regression model parameters to this simulated data to project the ability to work in the population 55 to 74. So we're going to use these parameters from the age 55 to 59 population and apply that to the population 55 to 74, take into account what we know about the different prevalences of factors in those different age categories. So the starting point in the background is this recent working paper. As far as I know, it's still just a working paper by David Cutler, titled Estimating Work Capacity Among Near Elderly and Elderly Men. And this was Cutler's approach, similar to what I've just outlined, those first two steps. He built a regression model predicting work capacity, but he calls it work capacity. It's just, are you working or not working? And then has a bunch of demographic and health status predictors. And then what he does is he applies that to the population 55 to 94. So we're just going to be going up to 74 with ours. But he's not interested in projecting here. He's just looking at that single cross-section of time. What might be the sort of ability to work, or as he calls it, capacity for work, but ability to work out to age 94. And here's what he finds. So here's age on this axis. He uses HRS data as well. This is the prevalence. These are kind of small, going up to about 0.75, down to 0 on that axis of the population. And here is the actual data by age of are you working or not. He does this only within men. And so, as you'd expect, you see the sharp decline around 61. It's about 50% of the population. As you'd expect, not many people working beyond 75. But by applying, and you'll notice here that these lines cross in this sort of 55, this average of 55 to 59, because he's applying it in the same way here. But what he does is then apply those regression parameters to the prevalence of these factors in his prediction model at different ages, and shows that, actually, based on what we know physically and mentally about what predicts work, we would expect that if people wanted to, based on his assumptions, there could be a much larger proportion of the population who has the ability to work. Okay, so what are we going to do to build on Cutler? First of all, we're going to include women. We're going to do all our analyses stratified by gender. We're going to use more detailed functional status measures. HRS actually has pretty good functional status measures that I'll talk about, which aren't collinear. They actually capture very different aspects of disability, which each in their own way impact ability to work. We're going to do a little more to consider more socioeconomic measures in our prediction models. And then the main difference is that we're going to focus on projection to 2050. So while Cutler does this projection across ages, we're going to also look at this, apply our model out across time. So again, why do we want to build a projection model? We're uncertain about this future ability to work. We know there's these trends there, but how do they all kind of fit together to potentially produce what might be the future potential workforce? So the first step that I talked about is building the model of the ability to work. The goal is predicting ability to work. I'm just saying here that I'm going to balance between a theoretical and data-driven approach. Primarily, I'm going to choose my parameters for that regression model based on theory of what we know from the literature predicts ability to work. But I'm going to go ahead and throw out or not include variables that are not significant. Or not substantially, not necessarily based on significance, but really have no value in predicting additionally in the model, just to keep the model a bit more under control. Although I don't really throw out much, most of the things are pretty significant. And I keep primary demographic factors in there, so in some cases race isn't significant, but I still want to keep that in the model based on my priors. We're going to look at socio-demographic factors and functional status. We use, like I said, HRS data. I use it from all waves of HRS data, which is just a random effect to account for the individual clustering. But it's essentially a cross-sectional type of analysis. We use the RAND version K cleaned up data set. Yeah?
Just trying to clarify your approach here. So you said you're applying this model initially to the age group 55 to 59 or 55 to 64?
55 to 59.
So are you assuming kind of implicitly that in that age range, if people can work, they do? They're not retiring early just to, go live a good life or something. So
Yeah.
that actually becomes a predictor of who's capable of working. Who is working reflects who is capable of working in that age range, and then you extrapolate that to older ages. Is that the logic of it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And one of the, we did a couple things to look at just that. So we did stratified models based on wealth. So we looked at people who had assets of over $1 million and didn't have assets of over $1 million. Also people who had like 0 assets, maybe who really had to work. And the predictors were, the magnitude of the predictors were actually very similar. And so that gives me some additional confidence that that's a reasonable assumption. But you're right, that is an assumption of the market.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where's occupation here?
What was that?
Different, ability to work, it differs greatly by occupation. Is that at all a part of this?
Yeah, so occupation is going to be in our model. Right now, the occupation that we're using is just a dichotomous measure of working class, non-working class. But earlier we had more detailed occupational measures. And it ends up those detailed occupational measures, so that actually the working class, non-working class capture a lot of it. Those sort of finer categories didn't seem to capture too much given all the other things that we have in our model, which I'll show in a minute.
So there's an interaction between functional status and then occupation?
No, not at, although we have looked at interactions as well, but just it's a separate factor in the model. The primary interactions or stratified models that we looked at were based on level of education, which may be capturing some of the same sort of things. And there were some differences. And what I'm presenting here, I'm just going to be using the non-stratified models. So it's something we're looking at. So here's just the question that I'm using as my dependent variable. Are you working for pay? You'll see, and this is age 55 to 59, 60 to 64, etc. This is around a 0.8, so this is around 0.75. 75% of the population among men working. Among women, sorry for the axes, the change here, this is a 0.6, so as you expect a little bit lower. In this category it's 0.55, goes to 0.4 for women. So just to say, as you'd expect, a little bit lower labor force participation among women, but certainly nothing, really, really low. And Cutler, I think, dismissed using, he didn't say really why, but dismissed using women because it was a little bit lower, and there may be other reasons just based on ability to work. But because some of the factors differ so much for women, we really wanted to, both their prevalences and potentially the change over time, we really wanted to also estimate this among women too. So here's getting now to what predictors we used in our model. So we used 4 categories of education, 4 categories of race, ethnicity, non-Hispanic white, non-Hispanic black, non-Hispanic other, Hispanic. The occupation, we'd earlier done it in a larger number of categories, but for these models I'm showing here, just put to white collar and blue collar. And this is occupation with the longest reported tenure, so mean of 20 years in HRS, rather than sort of a recent occupation, which could have been due to illness a change. So we get around that issue a little bit. So here's the functional status predictors of work, and I'm not going to, I think it's more efficient if you, as long as everyone can see this, for me not to read this, and let you read it. Not all of it, just take a peek to get an idea of sort of how these different indices are different.
And these are all self-reported?
These are, so everything except the cognitive is self-reported, yeah. So these are self-reported, and then cognitive is due, are tests based on delayed word recall, counting, naming, and vocabulary tests.
They don't do a squeeze test? And
Not that I know of. Does anyone know about that HRS? Do they have that?
They have that and like cholesterol and a couple other indicators, lung capacity, things like that.
Can you do that? That would be great to have some things that aren't self-reported in there. So squeeze test and some of those. Okay. Right. And so then the health status predictors that we're using in this model now are just are the BMI categories, standard categories, to account for any nonlinearities, and then the self-reported chronic conditions that are are asked of everyone in HRS. Okay, so first, this is the model among men, and so these are odds ratios and 95% confidence intervals. The dependent variable is, are you working for pay? This is in the HRS population 55 to 59. This is just among men. This, and then there's another slide from the same model. So this is part one of parameters from that model. And it's around 8,400, and I'm just using a random effect model. So first let's look at education. So comparison category, baseline category is less than high school. So having more education, especially becomes significant. Having some college, you're more likely to be working, more education you have. I use parents' education as a control variable, although no, we're not predicting with it, but just have something that's a potential confounder of the effects of education on work. So black is much for among men is much less likely to be working, and nothing significant for people in the other or Hispanic category. White collar, borderline, as a small effect of being more likely to work, being white collar. So these are then the functional status measures and the health measures. Again, this is all from that same model. It's just continued on to the next page. So a lot of these are much stronger. IADL, instrumental activities of daily living, as an odds ratio of 0.39. Depression. Oh, I should say I didn't mention that all of these are, I'm using them as dichotomous measures. If you actually look at the data, there's a huge drop-off between just having, so they're usually a sum of, as you saw on back here, so a sum of these multiple things. You see in the data, actually, there's a pretty big drop-off. If you just have one of them, it really impacts your ability to work. And then there is an effect across having more of those measures, but we dichotomize it just none or one or more for these.
And why is the ADL of so little?
So you'll see it's not that way for men. And in the interpretation, you have to remember controlling for all these other things. But for work, it's hard to say why. For women, it is a little stronger. If you don't have, a lot of the ADL is captured by some of these other measures. So if I just have ADL and IADL, like these initial models I was running, it was very significant. Yeah. But I think it's captured by some of these. Yeah.
Also, you said this age group is 55 through 59. So how many of them have trouble with ADL? My guess would be there wouldn't be a lot of variation.
Yeah, no, I should have, that was something I took out of this presentation, but I had some frequencies there. And it's, I'm trying to think of ADL in particular, but you get enough variation, I mean, it's kind of more than you think. It's actually surprising. Certainly, they go up dramatically with age. Sorry, I don't have a more quantitative answer. So BMI is a really interesting one. So, my prior and a lot of other people's priors, I think that would be that higher levels of BMI, you'd be less likely to be working. When you're controlling for other measures of disability, other diseases, they're pretty strongly much more likely to work. This is among men. Even at, I thought maybe there'd be a drop-off with this BMI over 35, that would really limit your impact. They're more likely to work. That Cutler sees this in his results too, which is, so that's kind of interesting. And then stronger, stroke is a lower prevalence than the others, but a really strong impact if you have a stroke. This isn't lung cancer, this is lung disease that they ask about. Cancers you might expect much less likely to work, but a pretty low prevalence in this population.
So some of these people have not been working for a long time. Is there potentially effect from not working on some of these guys? So I know cognitive people have thought about that direction.
Yeah, so we thought about the idea of looking at sort of past, are you thinking about past unemployment also as sort of an additional factor preventing you from working in the future? And that was something that that Nancy was in particular talked about, and I couldn't find, I mean maybe you know about this, someone else does, but good measures of sort of backing up 5 to 10 years in HRS of being unemployed, which is really surprising to me. But we couldn't find a good way to capture that. But am I getting your question right?
No, you've got the question.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is a limitation of this, and it's something we want to talk about in the paper, that there is an effect of not working on whether you work in the future. And so we're not accounting, as you'll see later, for sort of unemployment trends over time broader, but that could really have a sort of a lag impact if there's a lot of people who are unemployed, and that could be affecting employment. But since we're getting at sort of potential capacity, we didn't focus on that.
Related, as maybe this is what you're related, it seems like unemployment can also impact health to that effect. Employment, like some stuff on the lack of work and what that does to cognitive decline in people near retirement. And
yeah.
There's other factors as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we feel like that may be somewhat mitigated because it's sort of a little bit earlier, 55 to 59. But still, plenty of that's probably going on.
Could some of the BMI results be due to that be like under control for like health status?
Because of what, under control for health status?
Yeah, so like there is simply more grading.
Yeah, I don't know. So Cutler controlled for a lot. Yeah, I'm controlling for a lot here, and Cutler even controlled for a few more other sort of like high blood pressure type of things that were sort of risk factors. So he controlled for smoking and a few other things and saw the same results. So it's definitely possible.
Aren't you building a predictive model here? I'm not sure why this discussion is so central. You're trying to build a predictive model, not a causal model anyway, right? So.
Right, well we're building a predictive model, but we're sort of assuming that the relationship will predict something in the future, so in a sense there's some causal aspect to it. I mean, I tend to think about it as more of I think about it in that same way, but in prior presentations I've been sort of criticized for what I'm saying with these estimates not being causal. So I'm still...
Okay, I suggest we hold our questions a little bit now and get deeper into the paper.
I'll go through the women's quickly, but just to say, so education's stronger there. White-collar occupation's much stronger predictor. And then the African-American is the opposite sign, so more likely to be working if you're black among women, less likely among men, which you expect. And then just, so here's where this ADL is stronger for women. And BMI is weaker as a work promoting factor. Psychiatric disorder was a little stronger, stroke similar. The health ones tend to be pretty similar, but more similar between men and women than like the education occupation. Okay, so is this the second step? Yeah, one of the second step. So the second step is the estimation of the prevalence trends in these predictors out to 2050. And so fortunately for age, gender, race, ethnicity, there's a lot of people before me that put a lot of thought into this and work, so I can borrow from their work. And actually, Gretchen, I forget her last name, but you're going to call it Donauer, did some of this estimation by race, ethnicity, and age category, actually by individual ages, based on the Social Security technical panel estimates. So we use those rather than the Census Bureau estimates for this. And with education, we did a pretty simple thing here, which is we just assume that you're not going to be getting any more years of education after the age of 25. And so when we can just use the 2010. Yeah.
Present company.
So, there is a upper category of bachelor's degree or above. So we're all just going to be in that same category anyway. So we can just sort of look back, from that census data and count forward how that would move forward. So we're not accounting for immigration there, although all of these estimates are specific to gender and race ethnicity. So within that, we would be accounting for any sort of differential migration based on the proportion to the population. And just to show quickly, so for example, for age 55 to 59 among women, for non-Hispanic whites in black and non-Hispanic blacks in red. Just these are sort of the trends in. Let's see, this is a 4-year degree or above. So another factor was occupation, which there are not good estimates about. We're just using the 2 category at this point, the white collar, blue collar. Bureau of Labor Statistics goes ahead and it goes out on a limb and estimates 10 years out. So the last time they did this was 2008 to 2018. And so when you look across these categories, then we just did a linear extrapolation from there, but it ends up not mattering too much. It's a very small change. So based on what they do from 2008 to 2018, we just continue that out. But it's not really going to matter too much for our models because it's pretty flat. So there's a slight decline in blue collar anticipated and a slight incline in white collar. So the more substantive difficulty here is functional status, which is, given the strength of these predictors, is obviously very important to our model and what our model is going to show. And there's a couple trends that are important. It's been well documented, as maybe you probably know, from 1990 to 2002. There's this really dramatic decrease in disability, including a lot of different types of disabilities, IADLs, functional limitations. This really rapid decline, and there's been a bunch of review articles. This isn't based on one data set or a couple people's analyses, but a lot of meta-analyses on this, looking at lots and lots of data sets. And there's really dramatic, between 1 and 1.5% decline per year, between 2.7 and 0.4. So very rapid declines up to 2002. But then what's been happening recently when people, again, aggregating over, been a number of papers aggregating over a lot of data sets, that recent analysis suggests no change in functional status over the last 8 to 10 years. And so what we've decided to do here is, given, we're not sure, if we did a linear extrapolation, we kind of continue this decline even though there was a sort of flat. If we did some sort of spline model, it would probably be a sort of a flat. Obviously some other functional form would show it going back up again. So we're going to do 3 different types of scenarios as the approach we're taking. A 1% per year decline, no change, or a 1% per year increase for each of these 8 functional status measures. So here's just I'm just going to give a couple examples and I'll skip through these, but looking at, this gives you an idea of actually some of the prevalences at around near baseline is 2000, but this first projected in 2010. So this is among men aged 55 to 59. So a lot of them have, sorry about the colors here, this isn't real great, but this is large muscle, I believe that they have one of those. Mobility, about 25% have one of those. Gross motor, about 10% have one of those. And most are in the less than 10% range. But around 5 to 10% for men. And these declines are, what I'm showing here is what the decline would be based on scenario 1. And so this is among women. Similar levels among a lot of these, but again, I believe this is large muscle is a little bit higher, mobility is a little bit higher. And then looking at the population of men 70 to 74, as you expect, most of these go up, and this is the sort of decline with this one particular projection. And then off the charts here for women in 70 to 74 for some of these gross motor and large muscle factors. Okay, so the third step that we do is we simulate the future population based on these predictor prevalences over time. And so we just create a population of about 10,000 people with all of these characteristics, each individually distributed. And so for a lot of these, we can have do them stratified by race and gender. The sort of exception is that occupational projection, which we don't have any data there on the sort of working class projections that may be different for men and women for BLS, so we just apply the same thing to men and women. And we create this synthetic population that then we will apply our regression models to for that. So this population has the characteristics of what our population is from 55 to 74, but then we apply those regression models that we derive based on the population that was just 55 to 59. So I can pause for 1 second there. Basically makes sense. Okay, so here's what we find. So this is our main finding on the predicted ability to work. This line is scenario 1, which is a decrease of 1% per year in each of those disabilities. This is no change. The third line is if there's a 1% increase per year in the level of each of those disabilities. This is 2010 to 2050. And this, on this axis is just the proportion of the population aged 55 to 74. So I'll show you later what it looks like in the numbers, but to first just look at what the proportion of the population is that we predict would have the ability to work based on each of these scenarios. Go ahead.
So just to be sure that I'm clear, so this would assume that this assumes then that the effect of on your ability to work of some functional impairment is the same whether you're 59 or 72.
That's right. That's what our assumption is.
Okay. And is there why should I believe that?
So the reason is because we believe that when you think about these factors like can you let's say I'm just trying to think of a good example here. Can you go up a flight of stairs, one flight of stairs? And that's what is affecting your ability to work. If you're 55 and you can't go up a flight of stairs, or you're 68 and you can't go up your flight of stairs, we're kind of assuming there that both of those things are affecting whether you can do your job. Each of these things are affecting. It shouldn't matter what your age is.
So you're abstracting from the retirement decision. A person who's 68 or 78 might indeed choose to retire.
Right.
If he has trouble going up the stairs, but you don't care about that.
Right.
You're just saying, if he can go up the stairs, he can work.
Right, that's exactly right. So the characteristics change in the population. So certainly in these models, it affects all the prevalences increase. We're saying we can't use the regression model of 69 to 74-year-olds because lots of those people are not working just because they're tired of working. They want to do something else. But that's the assumption. Yeah.
Just to be clear, the population is not getting more obese over time, and also BMI predicts work. That isn't happening.
Yeah. So we left out. This is on my sort of next potential steps. I left out trends in those health status and the BMI, and just made those flat. So they're in the models, but they're just based on the current prevalences by age. They're just flat over time. And so, what other people did, so like in this future elderly model, they've looked at obesity changes based on assuming that people sort of carry forward their level of BMI from sort of age 25 going forward. So we could do that. I mean, I'm not certain that's a great reasonable assumption. What was that?
No change from 25.
Yeah.
Cool.
And also those, and I guess part of it, and then part of it is, somewhat counterintuitive parameters that I didn't want to put too much weight on that. Anyway, so.
So this is all based on percentages of the population that have these different conditions. There's not a micro. simulation.
Right, right.
So is there anything, do you have any problem when you put in these ADLs and IADLs? Are there correlations assumed, or?
So that's getting to one of these key factors in what I'm doing here is that we're just distributing them. We're not assuming, we're not putting a correlation matrix on this. We're just assuming the prevalence, because we're just creating this population of 10,000 and then just aggregating, doing the regression on this whole population and getting these overall estimates. And so we're not assuming any sort of correlation between these.
The new disability is going to essentially randomly distributed across the population. If you already are disabled, you're not any more likely to become disabled.
Yeah. Although random, but it's specific to race, ethnicity, gender, and age category. So within each of those things, there's the probability that we've estimated. So there is in some sense, it is clustered by what we know about what's more likely between different racial, ethnic groups, or at least the number of individuals, I should say that.
And what differentiates 2 and 3 again?
2 is no change at all in all these functional limitations over time. 3 is a 1% per year increase.
Increase in the
I just have a few more. Let me, and I'll just show you. So this is for men. A little bit higher starting point. And then for women, less of a decline. And this isn't just because it's proportionally less. There's actually sort of less of a decline in that scenario 3 for women. A little bit flatter, but a similar overall trend. And then I'll just show you what it looks like when and all I did on this next slide is simply take from this and multiply by the number of people in each of these categories at each year to just get the number of people in the population. And so under this, who have the ability to work. So again, this is just 55 to 74, but this sort of increased number who have an ability to work generally increased. But actually, even in that scenario 3, despite growing population, actually potentially less people able to work if there was that sort of reversal and an increase of 1% per year in that level of disability. So just to summarize the approach, again, we've kind of been over this in the questions too, but we use this multivariate prediction model based on these assumptions that we've talked about of this, what's true for 55 to 59-year-olds, that relationship is true for everyone. The estimation of these prevalence trends and predictors, we have a bit more confidence in some of the age and race ethnicity. With functional status, we speculate in a few different directions to run out these different scenarios, and then we apply that regression model. So this came up, but one of the things is, I'd like to fit these models in some different data sets in addition to HRS, so like National Health Interview Survey and National Long-Term Care Survey, just to see how stable the parameter estimates are. One of the nice things that I could do in National Health Interview Survey is look at different time periods. And so this kind of gets at how universal these may be, especially looking forward in time. So, it has IADLs and ADLs, so there's less of these factors in NHIS, but at least is the association of these factors with work going back 40 years very similar, or does it change? I think that would give us more confidence about using those parameters, into the future. And then also, there were concerns about how universal over time the sort of impacts of education would be as compared to some of the ADLs and IADLs. So running models without education and occupation as factors in there and looking how results vary based on that. And then as far as the population trends, thinking about other sources of trend data to use, do we want to do something to build in some trends in blood pressure, trends in prevalence of heart disease, anything like that, rather than just assuming those are static. Actually, and that great suggestion from earlier about building in some of these actually non-self-report measures into the model would be great. This is really a deterministic model, and so whether it's worth going and thinking about stochastic forecast bounds and in moving this forward. And then another thing is then projecting the actual workforce rather than potential. And so there, it kind of assuming, we could assume, actually fit these models in the different age strata and say, well, people tend to just prefer, if the preferences stay the same about when they would be leaving work, you know, to extrapolate that out and see what we would expect for an actual workforce as well. Okay, thanks.
I'm a little concerned that to some extent, whether you feel you're able to work or not depends upon whether society thinks you're able to work or not. Mm-hmm. That can change. And we made tremendous progress, let's say, with Americans with disabilities, for example, saying, look, you can work even though you're paralyzed or what have you. So that's a change in one direction. But you could also imagine changes in the other direction where society just says, okay, if you think you can't work, you can't work. Your intention and so forth. Have you considered that type of problem?
Yeah, I mean that's a really great point, and all of what we're doing here, you know, is based on sort of the current sort of the way job structure, both the structure of a job itself and the way society sees a job or ability to work. You know, that is all implicit in everything that we're estimating here. And so, you know, the one thing I haven't really thought of a way around that, but I think the one thing that we could play around with is alternative scenarios. You know, if there was sort of a type of environment where, you know, mobility wasn't as important, that if the importance of that was reduced on the job, and then we could sort of zero out that as a predictor and see, you know, how that would sort of change who was able to work. And so I've sort of thought about that mostly in terms of sort of counterfactuals, but haven't really thought of a way to completely get around it.
Well, I guess there's a policy issue, which is certain policies might inspire more people to declare that unable to work, or the other way around. So you need to be cautious about producing policy.
Yeah, no, I agree. No, thank you.
I'm sort of trying to wrap my head around the depressive measures being in there, because I feel like I'm hearing inability to work, like you cannot perform your job, so you stop. Versus I don't want to work anymore because I feel a little bit crummy. And I'm wondering if you include that, then I feel like I also would have been curious to see about spousal effects. You know, maybe women are more retiring because their spouses are older and are retired and like come retire and take care of me. I don't know. So I'm kind of. But then I keep saying, oh, but he's only using objective measures, so I don't know what your response is to my jump.
Yeah, no, it's certainly something we you know, wrestled with. I guess, and I think of CSD, and we're using a clinical cutoff of that, which is sort of a, so that is actually that's
using dichotomous.
Yeah, it's dichotomous on that, and that's actually the exception where it's not just one sort of dichotomized at one, but at sort of a clinical level of CSD. So I think at that level, it's sort of, you know, it's less about sort of, you know, your just perception of things, and it's a real, you know, a mental state that's going to prevent you from working.
I have a number of questions, but let me just start with one, which is, so if we go back to the first stage where you do this regression, so suppose we agree that almost all men who are able will be working, but for women the labor force participation rate is substantially lower. Now suppose that suppose it's 60% of women or 70% of women who would be working if they were able, but 30% are just, you know, for other reasons, not in that category. How is that going to affect the estimated effects, the estimated coefficients on these things? It seems to me it's going to bias them towards zero.
Yeah.
And then I wonder if there's some way of correcting for that, some other way to specify the regression so that doesn't happen. But I don't exactly come up with that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Well, so I wonder what you think about this, about just changing the intercept in the model to be exactly equal to what the men's rate, to say there's a sort of social difference that we want to take out at that intercept level, at baseline, and just essentially change the intercept in the model.
Yeah.
Like that.
Well, that's the sort of thing I'm thinking of, but then some of that difference in intercept is reflecting the fact that women have higher disability and chronic illness than men do, perhaps.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I think that there's,
At that age?
I think, well, if you look at those disability prevalence, they were higher for.
But there's.
So I was thinking along similar lines. But what if you made perhaps the heroic assumption that workforce participation rates of current 40-year-old men and women are going, the ratio there is going to be the same as the ratio for in 2050, the people who are 55 to 59, and then you took disability rates currently for men and women.
Childbearing. But still, there's probably some way, this sort of thing you're talking about, that would.
Just to sort of say that that if something that there have been changes in female workforce participation, so today is more reflective of the future than younger cohorts today are more reflective of future older cohorts than current older cohorts.
Right. And sort of benchmark off that.
And then the prevalence rates of disability you would take from current older cohorts.
Picking up on Carl's question earlier, do you have a sense of how the estimates would change if you did allow a correlation? Or if you move this to a micro model where your probability of being hit with a health shock depends on your health status this period?
Yeah.
Clearly a lot of these things are related, and the way I think of it is some people are sort of, their health is going to deteriorate, they're not going to be able to work, other people stay healthy, and it could affect these estimates either way.
Yeah, so we're actually running this right now in the in this future elderly model that Dana Goldman at USC has. It's a micro simulation, and so that's coming along. And our goal is to. I'm not sure if it'll be ready for the report, but eventually in a paper to sort of see when we do that, because that takes into account all those correlations and that, and it uses HRS data too. And we can give it the exact same factors for our model, but we should be able to see how different results are on that.
You don't have a strong sense of what it'll do to your...
No. I have to think about that more. Do you have any thoughts on if we'd see if this is biased more towards a null, or if it's exaggerated, or
if the unhealthy people tend to be the ones who... I just can think that it could go either way. Yeah, I mean, if there's some threshold and certain people tend towards it, then the question is whether it's concentrated in a small group of people, whether these illnesses are concentrated or whether they're dispersed. So maybe the degree to which they're concentrated or dispersed would give you some sense.
Yeah, I mean, so when I look at just a covariance matrix between all of these factors, I mean, there's some where levels are, this is actually in the HRS, not in the simulated data. I mean, the highest I see for some like gross motor and mobility or something like that are correlated at like 0.6 or something like that. And then it goes down to some of these other factors correlated around 0.2 or 0.3, and I mean, so I don't... so certainly there's people who have these multiple things. They're not randomly distributed.
Those are cross-sectional, right? Those are, if you have one of these right now, then you likely have another one right now.
Yeah, but you're thinking about
questions over
play out over time.
Really over time. If you're already in a doctor's care, then things are probably going to get worse.
Yeah.
Those doctors.
It's possible from the doctor. Yeah. No, but I know it.
So there's some of that captured already, and so if you had diabetes 10 years prior, and now that's manifested in limitations, then you show up both in diabetes and the cancer disorders. But to the extent that it will multiply further as you age, then certainly.
I have another question about these measures. So something like ability to climb stairs. Let's see, is that an IADL or an ADL? I don't remember. And it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But if a 55 to 59-year-old does not have that disability, they probably climb the stairs pretty fast. If a 90-year-old or 79-year-old, or what do you go to, 75, doesn't have that disability, they may still take 3 times as long to climb the stairs or walk 2 blocks, and they may not be able to do that while they're carrying a 10-pound bag and those kinds of things. This is more a problem, with the coupler design, but I wonder how many of these ADLs, IADLs are like that. They're sort of dichotomous, and the quantitative dimension might vary a great deal. Or are they of a kind where, this seems like a good assumption?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that it's it varies between them. I mean, there's some well, it could almost apply to a lot. I mean, let's just go back quickly just so we can think about this.
Having multiple ADLs must be different than just having one. Multiple limitations.
But some seem to be like consistent on the others, right? That's what I'm concerned about.
I mean, picking up a dime, that's one. You can either, well, I guess you could pick it up more quickly or not. I mean, I wonder how much, it's better addressed, so it's not perfect, and I think that's an issue, how much it's better addressed by having many of these in the model in the sense that you're just able to pick up where these unique points where people are hitting sort of a barrier rather than relying too much on just, just the ADLs and whether they happen to have one of those when work's affected by a lot. But it's certainly not a clear objective thing, and it's going to matter depending on people's job. And maybe for some jobs, you need to climb the stairs quickly, and others you don't.
I mean, this kind of exercise, it's not going to be perfectly clean and pretty. It's a very projection, conditional projection. It's very difficult, and they're been, but. So really, I think, the question is this the best we can do, which is bound to have lots of limitations, or are there some ways we might be able to improve it? I think it's very important to do it and sort of get it on the board. And
I guess I was expecting some kind of conclusion in terms of, well, therefore, how much could we raise the retirement age? And especially over time, how fast could it be going up? I mean, do you get those kinds of results out of this?
Yeah, I mean, that's, I've been really in the weeds with getting this to work and getting to the results at this point. And so, I think that's where my report, I could do a little bit, but it's sort of going to stop here, and I think it's going to, my paper, and then I think it's going to be the rest of the report that will kind of take that in a way and think about, the exact type of more relevant questions that you have. That's sort of my thought on it, unless that needs to be something that's done more internally on this paper.
I mean, one thing that might focus it more on a question like, could the age of retirement go up to 70, say, the Social Security normal age of retirement, or something like that, and currently going up to 67.
A very good age, 70.
So suppose Congress, we have an we have labor force participation rates in the neighborhood of, when the normal retirement age was 65, or I guess now about 66. We could project or look at BLS. Well, we could sort of project what would be the labor force participation rates that might result in a retirement age of 70, and then sort of use those as weights to focus on the population that's particularly involved sort of marginally in raising the retirement age, and seeing how what is the proportion of those people who could indeed raise it, and how is that proportion changing over time? That might be a useful thing to do. That's going a little bit beyond this, but only in a fairly mechanical way.
Yeah, and it seems like in that scenario 3 with the decline, I mean, that's where you could be pushing up against that limit if you're trying to just extend it a few years, and it just might not be enough.
I mean, this business about the rate of decline in disability having leveled off since 2002 is a very new result and a very important and sort of depressing change from what everyone was quite convinced of as a long-term trend, that things were just going to get better and better in this way, and it hasn't worked out that way, it seems. What the implications aren't clear, and of course the big, probably the most important question is, well, which of those scenarios is? And I think using those 3 is a good way to go, but it sort of leaves things up in the air and uncertain.
Yeah, what's the new 70? Is it 65 or 75?
Yeah.
Those are the 3 scenarios, right?
But if you just go back to that graph, I think it was Cutler's graph at the beginning, where you compared the 2, like, that one. I mean, that seems to suggest that people up to, 70, 75 are roughly as capable of working as those who are 55 to 59. I mean, it's a very gradual decline. I actually would expect that somehow it was there would be a more steep fall off at some point, but.
Yeah, I'd almost want to see these on an occupation-specific basis. It's one thing to be in the building trades and another thing to be in the projecting trades. And so, you've got this dichotomous variable in there that's netting out big muscle strength and so on, but really I think that a policy might be based not on, well, one would be one age fits all projection, and that seems to be the way we've gone, but if we wanted to be creative, we could have occupation-specific retirement ages that recognize the physical demands and cognitive demands of occupations, just like we might not want Supreme Court justices who are over 90, we might not want guys, electricians who are over 70, and so make a different set of projections that kind of go away with your dichotomizing of it, and clearly are not built into Cutler's at all, but somehow making things occupation specific in it. Or the other thought I had based on a conversation Ron was having with one of Feinstein's aides back in April, was to possibly scale occupations by their current disability rates. What fraction of people leave a job and start collecting disability pay at a given age, or the median age at which people leave an occupation to collect disability. Some way of scaling detailed occupations to capture that demand and physical demands side of it. I mean, that's way beyond your project, and you've got a deadline and stuff. But in thinking forward, I kind of like to see something along those lines.
Yeah, well, I mean, it wouldn't be difficult to do that first step of this occupation stratified models, and
I have to say, just looking at this graph, I'm just kind of stuck on this. There's just some kind of face plausibility problem.
Well, that's why we stop at 75.
Yeah. I mean, it really has to plummet. It has to be this kind of cascading of effects somehow that.
More talent.
One thing is that he doesn't use very many. I cut out what his model was, but he doesn't use very many disability measures. He uses 2 or 3 in his model.
So have you drawn this for your model?
But this is also proportion, right? These are proportions of these ages, right?
Yeah.
So people are dying, right?
It's among those surviving, isn't it?
Right. We're back to the 17th century.
Yeah, but still 40% at age 90.
I
drops from 70% to 40%.
But that's maybe a very small percentage of the 70-year-olds who are reaching 90 and still working.
Yeah, around. Yeah.
Anyway, other people were trying to ask questions.
Thanks for the question. Is this data they use longitudinal?
Yeah, but I don't take in, I treat it as cross-sectional, so I just...
I was just thinking it might be interesting to look at the switchers. So if you do observe someone in the data set stop working, and look at what kind of accumulation of these disability factors, or you see what I'm saying? It's those people that actually you observe before and after that decision that
Right,
they're working
right.
on it, and see how important some of these factors are in that decision.
Yeah, they may be very different. That would be, no.
Okay, I think we better wrap it up. Thank you very much. And those of us going to lunch, let's